Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Right now, protesters are gathering to march through the streets of Boston, demonstrating against a so-called free speech rally scheduled for noon on Boston Common. Rally organizers say it has nothing to do with what happened last week in Charlottesville when white supremacists shouted Nazi slogans, physically attacked people, and one of them allegedly killed an anti-racist counter-protester. But counter-protesters in Boston say they aren't backing down and are marching against hate speech and bigotry. A heavy police presence is expected, and we will keep an eye on that all morning. But first, to the latest news out of Washington, D.C., or Bedminster, as the case may be. Steve Bannon has left the White House and returned, to the extent he ever really left, to Breitbart, which he built into the self-proclaimed platform of the alt-right, a loosely defined group that includes white nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and misogynists. But Bannon was also the resident economic nationalist at the White House, the driving force behind efforts to dismantle trade deals and launch an economic war with China. Bannon allies have called him the linchpin that connects Trump to his base and the intellectual heart of the Trump movement. So with him gone, what happens to Trump now? Joining me now is Sarah Kendzior, journalist and scholar of authoritarian states, former Breitbart media consultant Kurt Bardella, former chief White House ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush, Richard Painter, TheRoot.com's Jason Johnson, and David Korn of Mother Jones. Thank you all for being here. Kurt, I'm going to go to you first on what it means for not only Bannon to have left, but left the way he did. He walked over to Breitbart.com and sort of walked into cheers and sort of gave a big sort of rah-rah speech. But what do you think it means to the White House that he's no longer there?
Well, I think it means that you're going to see a lot more of Steve Bannon publicly than you have really to this point. A lot of what's been happening in recent weeks and months has been Bannon under the radar. Bannon maybe leaking stuff or having people leak for him. He wasn't necessarily the public face of it. Now he's unshackled. He's liberated. He can do and operate however he wants. Remember, this is not a person who's meant to serve at the pleasure of anybody. He ran Breitbart like a dictator. He is a dictatorial type of figure. So it kind of makes sense that it didn't really work so well when he had to report to a chief of staff and run his ideas by people before he could do them. He likes to just operate freely. Well, now he can, and that's bad news for those who remain at the White House. It's bad news for congressional leadership, leaders like Paul Ryan, like Mitch McConnell. It's going to make life a lot more difficult for the White House because now Steve has no limitations, nothing holding him back. And
Kurt, you know, you made the point that it's not clear that Bannon ever really left. When you were talking about this, that he ever really left Breitbart, which is an ethical question, whether he was still sort of technically there. But were you surprised that he went and gave an interview on the record immediately to the Weekly Standard in which he said the following: the Trump presidency that we fought for and won is over, Bannon said Friday, shortly after confirming his departure. We still have a huge movement and we will make something of this Trump presidency, but that presidency is over. It'll be something else, and there'll be all kinds of fights, and there'll be good days and bad days, but that presidency is over. Were you surprised that he went and gave that kind of an interview?
No, because I think in some ways he's also speaking, like everyone, to a constituency of one. He's reaching Donald Trump through his favorite vehicle, the press, and he's sending the message that the support that he had from Breitbart, the cover that they would run for Trump whenever anything bad would go on, that's in jeopardy right now unless President Trump adheres to the ideals and the rhetoric that got him elected in the first place. I think Bannon's fear is that with these, quote, West Wing Democrats surrounding Trump now, that Trump will try to moderate and move more to the middle to actually maybe try to achieve something. And Steve is sending out the message to Donald Trump that if you do that, Breitbart will be there, they will attack you. And they will send the message to their base, to those crazy conservatives and racists and homophobics and xenophobics, that this isn't the guy that we voted for. He's been co-opted. And I would not be surprised at all, Joy, if they start looking for a new candidate, a new person to try to rally around.
Yeah, and, you know, Richard Painter, you've been calling for Bannon and the other Bannonites, you know, his other fellow travelers to be swept out of the White House. And to the point that Kurt just made, the other thing that Bannon told the Weekly Standard was the following: I think they're going to try to moderate him, Bannon says, and he means the so-called Democrats and globalists. I think he'll sign a clean debt ceiling. I think you'll see all this stuff. His natural tendency, and I think you saw it this week on Charlottesville, his actual default position is the position of his base, the position that got him elected. I think you're going to see a lot of constraints on that. I think it'll be much more conventional. Do you concur that people in the White House may try to turn Donald Trump into something other than the alt-right person he is?
Well, if they're smart, they certainly will. They got to stop worrying about 2020 and focus on saving this presidency. There are three things they need to do to save this presidency. First, clean out all of the alt-right. Sebastian Gorka, Stephen Miller, the rest. He needs to be the Arnold Schwarzenegger of the Republican Party, be the Terminator of the alt-right. Out they. Second, he needs to have a personal conversion and renounce and repent for racism, for bigotry, and all the hatred that he has espoused thus far. And that conversion better be faster than St. Paul on the road to Damascus. He's got to do it now. Third, repudiate the so-called religious right, the fake Christians who've been dominating the Republican Party. If he makes it clear that he repudiates them, the Democrats will be checkmated because they are not going to want Mike Pence if Trump repudiates the phony Christians and the religious right and embraces the true American values that have traditionally been in the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party of inclusion and democracy. So if he does those three things, I think he could save this presidency. But right now, he's in serious trouble. He should stop worrying about the idiots on the far right and what they're going to do to him in 2020. Make this a successful term and make sure that the extremists are thrown out of the Republican Party. That includes all those people in the White House. That includes Steve Bannon, Breitbart News, the racist platform they've been running, people like Ann Coulter who run around attacking people. We need those people out of the Republican Party so we can govern and pass legislation to help Americans get health care, protect the planet, and do what Republicans and Democrats traditionally wanted to do to serve the American people.
I see David Corn nodding his head. David Corn, you have thoughts?
I love Richard Painter. You've been speaking truth to power from the Republican side. All those things that you mentioned, it's not going to happen. I mean, it's a wish list. I'd like to see it happen too. Donald Trump is 71, whatever, 72 years old now. He has been playing with race or an outright racist for decades. He got to where he was as a birther. I don't think I think he suffers from certain personality issues. So I don't think there's going to be any conversion. I think that's not going to happen. To me, the interesting thing here is whether Bannon can actually mount the type of war or offensive that people think he can mount. He has a difficult task. It's not easy to attack the people working for a president without attacking the president. And when you attack Donald Trump, you know what happens. And so if it's, so I don't see how he sort of goes after people in the West Wing or people that Trump may be working with or parts of Trump agenda without Trump starting to treat him the way he treats everybody else. And that leads to a civil war within the Republican Party and within Donald Trump's base. Most of the people who voted for Donald Trump probably never heard of Steve Bannon at the time. So, if Steve Bannon, he's a disruptor. He loves chaos. He's like the Joker. He likes chaos. But at the same time, that may not be good for the party, may not be good for the Trump presidency, although it may be good for Steve Bannon's pocketbook and for the Mercers.
Yeah, well, he doesn't attack everybody, David Corn, because white nationalists don't get attacked. Putin doesn't get attacked.
No, he attacks the people. My point is he attacks the people who question him or go after him. Yeah. So how Steve Bannon can take a critical approach to the Trump presidency without attacking Trump and without being attacked back is a very, very difficult thing to see.
I'm going to come back to Kurt on whether or not Donald Trump has a fear of Steve Bannon, because he hasn't attacked him yet. I mean, he responded this morning with a tweet praising him. But Jason, I want to go to you on this sort of question of where Donald Trump's sort of center and core is. Because the idea that if you take out Bannon and Gorka and you get rid of Stephen Miller and you sweep them out, that Richard Painter has suggested, that somehow Trump would be a different person. I wonder if you agree that that is the case, or whether you think the core of Donald Trump and the core of Steve Bannon are essentially the same.
Yeah, I mean, you can pull all the caramel on the candy apple that you want. It's still rotten apple at the core, right? Trump is still Trump. I mean, he hired these people because they reflected his values. They didn't make him. He made them. But I think the other issue is this. Bannon is dangerous on the outside. First off, the White House wasn't big enough for those two egos, right? So Bannon's now out. He's going to be able to attack. But think of what he can legitimately say now. And this isn't in any way legitimizing white nationalism, but he can say, look at who the core advisors are now for this president. Jared, Ivanka, Cohen, Kellyanne Conway, who's not really a policy person. She's a pollster. Omarosa, Kelly. Where are the Republicans? There aren't that many Republicans anymore except for Mike Pence, and Mike is always told when the meetings are late. And then on top of that, you don't really have any more economic nationalists. So I think Bannon is going to have an audience, not just the far right, but economic nationalists within the Republican Party who are like, who is this guy? There's no one who speaks for us anymore in the president's inner circle.
And to that point, Sarah, you know, aside from the white nationalist aspects of Steve Bannon and what Breitbart built, these are the things that he came in on that list. Remember, he had that wall of things that he wanted to see that Donald Trump do. Trade penalties against China, ending multilateral trade agreements, decreasing both legal and illegal immigration, massive infrastructure spending, and higher taxes on the rich, which is an odd sort of mix of things for a supposed Republican, but they are this sort of grab bag of populist issues that attracted at least some of the people who support Donald Trump. If that stuff goes away, Sarah, does Donald Trump lose his almost sort of cult-like hold on his supporters?
I mean, I think that stuff was never really there. I think a lot of what Bannon said and what Trump said was false populism. It was a pretext in order to cover xenophobic policies, white nationalist policies, anti-Muslim policies, and that is how they governed. I mean, Steve Bannon was there for 6 months. You can tell, you know, whether he actually believed sincerely in these policies, whether he cared for what they call the so-called forgotten people. He didn't. You know, he's also a former Goldman Sachs guy, you know, a Harvard-educated, you know, millionaire, if not billionaire. This is not someone who understands what regular people are going through. This is not someone who cares about what regular people are going through, and neither is Trump. And so I don't really, you know, see any future in those ideas being responded to. I don't think things will be economically more equal. And I think, as many have pointed out, this is still a white supremacist House. You still have actual Nazis in the House. You have Jeff Sessions, who's a longtime antagonist against civil rights, and you have policies that back up these ideas in practice. And so what Bannon is probably going to do when he leaves is just support this aspect of Trump's, you know, agenda from the outside, which can be actually, I think, more dangerous and more harmful than having him in the White House, where he was, you know, as was mentioned, somewhat contained.
Let me go back to the person who knows Steve Bannon best on this panel, Kurt Bardella. A, does Steve Bannon really believe in these economic populist ideas? And B, is Donald Trump afraid of him?
I think that there, to some degree, yes, Steve does believe in some of these economic policies, the idea that, you know, the America First side of things, the role that we have in trade and global economic community. I do think that there is some consternation with Trump and worry about what Steve will do on the outside. I think that's part of the reason why it took so long for him to actually get rid of Steve in the first place. I think this is something that he's probably wanted to do for a while, but kept pushing off and holding off because he didn't know how Steve would react. I think there's a high possibility, though, that Steve will look to try to expand the Breitbart empire, expand their media platforms. He oftentimes has talked about wanting to really go to war with Fox News and build a platform that, you know, he believes that Fox moved too far to the middle, hard as that is to believe, and that there's room to the right of Fox to build something. And it could very well end up being a vessel that one day Donald Trump, maybe sooner than later, joins them when he's not the president of the United States anymore.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks and months. There's still a big investigation by the FBI hanging over Donald Trump. And I think that there's a real likelihood that Steve could be building something that gives Trump an out later on in the year.
Yeah, watch what happens with the Mercer money. Everybody needs to look up that Jane Mayer profile on Robert Mercer and what he thinks in his head and the money he's putting behind Steve Bannon. Very interesting. Sarah, Richard, Jason, and David will join us later. Kurt Bardella, thank you very much. And you will be back with us tonight at 7 p.m. So